When we talk about how men view sex, one of the most overlooked truths is that for most men, sex is far more than a physical act. On the surface, it may look like it's simply about desire, chemistry, or release, but underneath, it often carries a much deeper meaning. At its core, sex is one of the ways men experience emotional validation. It's how they feel wanted, accepted, and seen. And that matters because for many men, a verbal affirmation doesn't come as naturally. They're not always the best at saying, "I need you," or "I feel insecure." Instead, the way they express and receive that validation often shows up in intimacy. Think about it. Women, generally speaking, are socialized to use words and emotions as their primary form of connection. Men, on the other hand, are conditioned from an early age to suppress a lot of that. They're told to be strong, to stay in control, to never show weakness. But sex is one of the very few spaces where many men feel they can drop that mask. In that moment, what he's really asking is, do you want me? Do you accept me as I am? Am I enough for you? And when the answer feels like a genuine yes, it hits him in a place words rarely reach. This is where psychology comes in. Researchers often talk about men tying self-worth to competence, whether in their careers, their achievements, or their ability to provide. But in relationships, that same dynamic transfers to intimacy. If he feels rejected, dismissed, or unwanted in that area, it doesn't just feel like a small thing, it cuts at his very sense of value. That's why some men can seem overly focused on sex. To a partner, it might look like a physical craving, but to him, it's tied directly to his identity and confidence. Now, I want you to consider something deeper. Philosophers throughout history have debated the human need to be seen, not just looked at, but truly recognized in our existence. Martin Buber, the great philosopher, once wrote about the difference between relationships where people are treated as objects and I-thou relationships where people are fully acknowledged as human beings. For many men, sex is one of the rare moments where they feel they are in that I-thou space. They're not just a provider, not just a worker, not just someone carrying expectations. In that vulnerable exchange, but they feel like they are fully seen, accepted, and desired. That's why it means so much more than the act itself. But let's be clear, this doesn't mean every man who wants sex is looking for deep validation. Some do use it casually, superficially, or even manipulatively. The distinction is in the energy behind it. When a man truly values you, sex becomes the bridge where he feels safe enough to let his guard down. It's where his need for admiration, respect, and connection come together. And this is why rejection in this area can feel so devastating. So just note to the act, it feels like note to him as a man. This is where awareness becomes powerful. Because if you can understand that sex for a man is often a request for validation rather than simply an appetite, you start to see it differently. You stop viewing it as him just wanting something, and you begin to recognize it as his unspoken need to feel loved and valued. And when that need is met, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire, it changes everything. It brings out a softer, more vulnerable side of him that you might not see anywhere else in his life. Let me put it this way. A man can walk into a boardroom and dominate with confidence. He can walk into a gym and carry strength. But when he walks into the bedroom with the woman he loves, he is seeking something that no title, no bank account, no achievement can give him. He's seeking affirmation that who he is, stripped of all roles and armor, is still enough. That's why when a man feels deeply desired by his partner, it doesn't just affect his sex life, it spills into every other area of his existence. He becomes more confident in his work, more motivated in his goals, more committed in the relationship. Why? Because he feels like his foundation is secure. He feels like he is not just tolerated, but chosen. And that fuels him in ways nothing else can. So if you've ever wondered why intimacy carries such weight for a man, it's because at a subconscious level, it's not about sex, it's about significance. It's about being recognized as valuable, as wanted, as worthy. And that brings us to the reflection I want to leave you with. Next time you think about sex in the context of a man's world, don't just ask, does he want me physically? Ask instead, what part of him is he asking me to see, to validate, to embrace in this moment? Because when you understand that, you don't just transform your intimacy, you transform your relationship. Sex for a man is not just a physical connection. It's the deepest unspoken question, am I enough? And when he feels that answer is yes, everything changes. If sex is about validation at a personal level, then it naturally leads to a bigger truth. The way a man experiences sex with you shapes how he defines the relationship itself. This is something most people overlook, but it's fundamental. For a lot of men, intimacy is not separate from how they categorize the connection. It's the lens through which they decide if the relationship is casual, serious, or deeply significant. Now, here's where psychology intersects with behavior. Men tend to compartmentalize. They often sort experiences into mental boxes: work, friends, goals, family, love. Sex is no different. The quality and meaning he attaches to intimacy with you determines which box he puts you in. Is this a passing encounter? Is this a partnership he respects and invests in? Or is this something sacred, where he sees you as someone who could be central to his life? His approach to sex gives you the clues. Think about the difference. When sex is purely physical for him, it usually comes with detachment. He's present in the act, but not invested in the aftermath. He may not linger. He may not communicate deeply. He may not connect emotionally. But when sex carries emotional weight, it shifts the entire dynamic. He begins to weave that intimacy into his vision of the future. It becomes not just an act of pleasure, but an affirmation of the kind of relationship he wants to build with you. And here's something important: men often won't articulate this directly. They don't usually sit down and say, "The way we connect in sex tells me whether I see this as casual or committed." But their behavior will reveal it. You'll notice it in how he treats you outside the bedroom, whether he initiates deeper conversations, whether he integrates you into his life, whether he shows consistency. Because definition of the relationship is being shaped in real time by the intimacy you share. Philosophically, this ties in how humans seek meaning. The existentialist talked about how every action carries weight, that what we do is always tied to how we perceive the world and ourselves in it. For men, sex is one of those actions. It's not isolated, it's entangled with identity, respect, and long-term intention. So when a man decides whether he sees you as someone temporary or as someone significant, he isn't just evaluating your personality or your compatibility. He's evaluating how the intimacy feels and what that says about the potential between you. This is why casual sex often collapses before turning into something deeper. If a man has already placed the intimacy in a category that feels transactional or shallow, it's difficult for him to suddenly recast it as something sacred. But when the intimacy is aligned with respect, connection, and genuine attraction, he begins to view the relationship differently. It's no longer about the act, it's about the bond that the act symbolizes. Let me give you a practical perspective. Imagine a man who values achievement above all else. His career defines him. His sense of worth is built on what he produces, what he earns, how he performs. Then he meets a woman where sex is not just physical release, but emotional grounding. Suddenly, but that part of his life starts to rival his career in importance. He doesn't just feel like a provider or an achiever. He feels like a partner. And when he feels that shift, it changes how he defines the relationship. It moves from something he enjoys to something he prioritizes. That's the power intimacy has over how a man frames his commitment. And this leads us to a crucial point for men. The meaning of sex often precedes the label of the relationship. A woman may wait for him to verbalize commitment, but often he has already decided subconsciously how he views the bond based on the intimacy. If he feels it's casual, his behavior will stay casual. If he feels it's meaningful, he will begin to act accordingly, even before he puts words to it. Now, I want you to see the opportunity here, because if you understand that intimacy shapes his definition of the relationship, you gain clarity. You stop wondering, why hasn't he committed? And instead, you start asking, what meaning has he attached to this intimacy? And once you know that, you can make empowered choices about what you're willing to accept. At the deepest level, what men are really doing is using sex as a compass. It helps them navigate whether they're heading toward long-term commitment, short-term attraction, or something in between. And like any compass, it doesn't lie, it always points toward how he truly perceives the bond. So here's what I want you to reflect on. Don't just pay attention to what a man says about the relationship. Watch how he approaches intimacy with you and how he behaves afterward. Because in that space, you'll discover whether he's writing a story of temporary desire or a story of lasting connection. Sex for a man is never just sex. It's the blueprint of how he defines the relationship. When you start to understand that sex validates a man on a personal level and then shapes how he defines the relationship, you naturally come to the next layer. The quality of that intimacy determines how much he's willing to invest. This is critical, because investment is the language of commitment. Men don't just commit with their words, they commit with their time, their energy, their resources, their attention. And what determines whether he chooses to invest or hold back often comes down to how he experiences intimacy with you. Now let me clarify something, because this is where people get it wrong. Men aren't sitting there making a conscious checklist, saying, if the sex is good, I'll commit more. That's a surface level interpretation. What's really happening is that sex, when it's meaningful, activates a deeper emotional bond. It makes him feel safe, appreciated, and connected. And that feeling compels him to give more of himself. When the intimacy is shallow, disconnected, or purely physical, he doesn't feel that same pull. The energy remains transactional. But when the intimacy carries depth, when it feels like a genuine meeting of bodies, minds, and souls, that's when he starts pouring in the relationship in ways he doesn't in casual situations. It comes back to the psychology of human behavior. We invest in what we value. If you think about your own life, you don't pour time and energy into things that mean nothing to you. You pour into what gives you a return, not just materially, but emotionally and spiritually. Men are the same. When intimacy makes him feel validated, respected, and seen, he begins to feel like the relationship is worth building. He recognizes that there is something unique here, something he cannot easily replace. And that awareness unlocks his willingness to give more. I want to take this a step deeper. From a philosophical standpoint, investment is tied to meaning. Viktor Frankl, the great psychologist and Holocaust survivor, wrote that human beings are driven by a search for meaning above all else. For men, intimacy often becomes one of the clearest indicators of whether that meaning exists in a relationship. If he experiences sex as purely mechanical, the relationship doesn't feel meaningful to him. But if he experiences it as transformative, as a space where he's both grounded and elevated, then suddenly the relationship takes on significance. And significance is what justifies investment. Now let's get practical. How do you see this play out in real life? A man who feels deeply connected during intimacy starts behaving differently outside of it. He starts showing up in more consistent ways. He begins to prioritize your needs alongside his own. He may start thinking long-term, planning, including you in decisions, seeking your input. Why? Because the intimacy has confirmed to him that this is not just another relationship. It's something that feeds him, something that inspires him to give. On the other hand, when the intimacy doesn't carry that sense of connection, you'll notice his level of effort taper off. He might still enjoy spending time with you, but he won't invest with the same intensity. He won't rearrange his schedule. He won't stretch himself. He won't step outside his comfort zone in the same way. Because in his subconscious, the bond doesn't feel worthy of long-term energy. And here's the truth: men don't invest heavily in what they believe is temporary. They invest in what feels irreplaceable. And intimacy is often the filter through which they decide which category you fall into. That's why understanding this point is so important. If you keep thinking sex is just about pleasure, you miss the fact that it's also about influence. The kind of influence that inspires a man to either hold back or go all in. This is where you have power. Because if you can create intimacy that isn't just physical, but emotional, spiritual, even psychological, you elevate the relationship to a level where he wants to invest. And notice the word wants. You can't force a man to commit, but you can inspire him to by creating the kind of connection that makes him choose it freely. It's a different kind of power. So the question becomes, what quality of intimacy are you cultivating? Is it surface level where both of you are just going through the motions? Or is it deeper, where you're both showing up fully present, fully vulnerable, fully engaged? Because the answer to that question will directly influence how much he gives to the relationship. And this is the takeaway I want to leave you with. Men invest in proportion to how much intimacy means to them. If it feels like routine, they'll treat it like routine. If it feels profound, they'll rise to meet that level of significance. So if you ever wonder why a man is holding back, look at the intimacy. Because it's not just about sex, it's about the meaning it carries for him. And when the meaning is deep, the investment will always follow. Intimacy is the ignition, investment is the fire. When you step back and look at everything we've talked about, the need for validation, how intimacy shapes the definition of the relationship, and how the quality of intimacy determines his level of investment, you come to the final truth: sex reveals a man's true emotional state. You can learn more about a man from the way he behaves before, during, and after intimacy than you can from hours of conversation. Because in that space, the masks tend to fall away. The polished image he presents to the world, the roles he plays at work, the confidence he projects socially. All of that gets stripped down, and what you're left with is his raw self. His actions in those moments are a mirror of how he actually feels. Think about it. If a man is detached, distracted, or distant afterward, it often reflects a lack of emotional investment. If he is present affectionate and grounded, it signals that intimacy carries weight for him. Even the smallest gestures, the way he looks at you, the way he holds you, the way he either lingers or withdraws, are telling. These are not just habits, they're signals. They're revelations of his emotional truth. Psychologists often talk about nonverbal communication being more powerful than words. We all know it: body language, tone, eye contact. But in intimacy, that principle is amplified, because sex is the one arena where people are most vulnerable, where defenses are lowered. So whatever's underneath, fear, insecurity, affection, love, comes through, whether he realizes it or not. And this is why I call intimacy a mirror. It doesn't just reveal what's on the surface. It reflects the state of his heart. If he values you, you will feel it. If he is only using you, you will feel that too. The energy cannot lie because it bypasses language and logic. Philosophically, this connects to the idea that truth is not always spoken. It's demonstrated. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, once said, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." In relationships, sex is one of those experiences that, when you look back, often shows you what was true all along. Maybe you ignored the signals, maybe you rationalized them away, but the truth was present in the way he showed up, or didn't. When intimacy stripped away all pretense. And here's the part most people miss: sex doesn't just reveal how he feels about you. It also reveals how he feels about himself. A man who feels unworthy, insecure, or inadequate will often bring that energy into the experience. He may overcompensate with performance or withdraw emotionally to protect himself. On the man who feels grounded, worthy, and open will bring presence, vulnerability, and connection. So in those moments, you're not just witnessing his feelings for you. You're witnessing his relationship with himself. Now let's be real. Not every man is comfortable with this kind of vulnerability. For many, sex is the only space where they feel safe enough to reveal it. That's why for some men, the moments after sex are the most intimate of all. When the armor is off, when the act is over, when there's no script to follow, that's when the truth slips out. Maybe in silence, maybe in how quickly he turns away or how tightly he holds on. But those little things speak volumes. And this is where awareness becomes powerful for you. Because if you start paying attention, you can stop guessing where you stand. You won't have to rely only on his words. His actions during and after intimacy will give you the real story. Does he treat it as an escape, or does he treat it as connection? Does he use the moment to hide or to reveal? Does he come closer, or does he create distance? These answers are already there, you just have to be willing to see them. So the question is, what do you do with this truth? You don't use it to judge harshly, but you use it to gain clarity. If his emotional state during intimacy shows love, care, and respect, that's a sign you're building something solid. If it shows avoidance, detachment, or disregard, that's a red flag you can't afford to ignore. Because in the end, sex isn't just about what happens in the moment. It's about what it reveals about the future. And here's the thought I want to leave you with. Sex is not only a physical act, not only validation, not only a relationship, defining force, or a driver of investment. It is the most unfiltered expression of truth a man will ever show you. It reveals his heart, his intentions, and his emotional state, whether he wants it to or not. So pay attention. Listen not just with your ears, but with your awareness. Because when you do, you'll stop being confused by mixed signals. You'll stop wasting time on words that don't match actions. You'll start to see clearly what's real. And that clarity gives you power. Because when you see the truth, you can finally decide what to do with it. Sex will always reveal the truth. The question is, are you willing to see it and act accordingly?